Amid the intoxicating shine of a life of luxury, an unexpected encounter becomes the starting point for a journey of discoveries, fears, and transformations. She, a woman wrapped in mystery, with a past holding more than she could ever imagine. He, a determined millionaire, but with an emptiness that success cannot fill. When their paths cross, a deep connection begins to form, challenging them both to rethink their lives, their fears, and their deepest truths. Can love truly be the key to freedom, or will it come at a price neither of them is prepared to pay? Subscribe to the channel and like the video to follow this exciting journey. The night was cold and filled with a peculiar elegance, with the full moon reflecting its soft light on the river's waters. In the luxurious ballroom of one of New York's most exclusive clubs, guests danced, laughed, and exchanged glances loaded with intentions. Among them, a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and a perfectly tailored suit observed the crowd. Ethan Parker, the millionaire owner of one of the country's largest tech companies, was used to being the center of attention. But that night, something felt different. He was tired of the superficial glitter of parties. His gaze was searching for something deeper, something that went beyond the shallowness that surrounded him. And that was when his eyes locked with hers. She was standing at the edge of the dance floor, elegant and almost untouchable, wearing a stunning red dress that seemed to reflect the light in a supernatural way. Her long, dark hair cascaded gently over her shoulders, and her green eyes shone like emeralds amid the crowd. The woman in red, as everyone called her, was an enigmatic figure. Her smile was soft, but her gaze exuded mystery. She didn't mingle with the other guests. She seemed to belong to another world, someone who wasn't impressed by the luxury around her. Her name was Isabella, but no one knew much about her. Rumors said she was an actress, or perhaps an artist, but she never confirmed anything. She was there, but at the same time, it felt like she didn't belong to that world. Ethan, despite his fame and fortune, found himself drawn to something beyond her beauty. There was something about her demeanor that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Without a second thought, he moved closer, leaving behind the superficial conversations that surrounded him. As he approached her, the sound of the music seemed to fade away, leaving a silence charged with palpable tension. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice husky but filled with irresistible curiosity. Isabella looked at him for a moment, analyzing him with an expression that mixed skepticism and a hint of amusement. She had never paid attention to men like him, men who thought money could buy everything. But something in Ethan made her hesitate. "Perhaps," she replied, with a shy but enigmatic smile. What she didn't know was that this simple "perhaps" would change their lives forever. The music swirled around them as they stepped onto the dance floor, and for a brief moment, it felt like the rest of the world disappeared. Ethan gently placed his hand on Isabella's waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. There was an unspoken understanding between them as they glided across the floor, the rest of the room fading into the background. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he felt this alive, this aware. The sound of Isabella's soft laughter made his heart skip a beat, and the way she moved was intoxicating. She had a grace that he had never encountered before, a beauty that didn't need the spotlight, but seemed to command it anyway. Isabella, too, felt something stirring inside her. She wasn't used to men like Ethan, men who had everything yet seemed to search for something more, but there was something different about him. His presence wasn't overpowering, yet it had a magnetism that pulled her in. She found herself looking into his eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a mystery to be solved. She felt seen. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. Ethan smiled, his eyes softening. "I've been told that before." There was a slight tension in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of tension that promised something more, something deep and undeniable. They danced on, lost in the rhythm of the music, but their minds were elsewhere, caught in the mystery of the moment. The night stretched on, and as the music faded into a softer tune, Ethan and Isabella found themselves lingering by the balcony, away from the noise of the party. The air was cooler here, with a soft breeze sweeping through the city streets, carrying the scent of the river and the distant sound of carriages. The lights of New York twinkled like 1,000 stars, each one telling a story of dreams, struggles, and ambitions. I never asked you. What brought you to this world of excess? Ethan asked, his voice quieter now, more contemplative. A woman like you doesn't belong in places like this. Isabella turned to face him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected the question, and it made her pause. The truth was, she didn't belong here, not in the way the others did. She wasn't interested in the wealth, the power, or the shallow conversations. But there was something about Ethan that made her want to open up, to reveal the things she had hidden from everyone for so long. I could ask you the same thing, she replied, her voice tinged with a trace of humor. What makes you think you belong in this world of luxury? Ethan chuckled softly, his eyes narrowing slightly. Maybe because I built it, he said, his gaze intense. But that doesn't mean I understand it. I've spent so many years chasing success that I've forgotten what it means to truly feel something. To connect. There was a long pause as Isabella studied him. His words were raw, vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but something in his eyes told her it was true. I'm not here for the money or the power, she said finally, her voice steady. I'm here because I'm running from something, or perhaps someone. But what's most important to me now is to be free. Free to choose who I am and who I want to be. Ethan took a step closer, his heart racing at her words. There was a sadness in her tone that he hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability she kept carefully hidden beneath the elegance and mystery that surrounded her. Then let me help you, he said, his voice low and sincere. Let me help you find that freedom. Isabella's eyes softened, but she didn't answer immediately. She knew the risks of getting too close to someone like Ethan. Yet, there was an undeniable pull between them, a connection that seemed to transcend the surface of their conversation. For the first time that night, she felt the weight of his presence not as an obstacle, but as a promise. A promise of something new, something worth exploring. Maybe, she said softly, her lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Maybe you can. Days passed, but the memory of that night lingered in both their minds. Ethan couldn't get Isabella out of his thoughts, and he found himself searching for reasons to see her again. It wasn't just her beauty or her mystery, it was the way she made him feel alive, as if the weight of his success and responsibilities had no meaning in her presence. It was a rare feeling, one he hadn't experienced in years, and it left him craving more. He decided to take a chance. If there was one thing Ethan had learned in life, it was that nothing ventured, nothing gained. He was a man who lived by his own rules, and if he wanted something, he took it, and he wanted Isabella. He called her that morning, his heart racing as he dialed her number. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he hoped she would pick up. Hello? Her voice, as soft and measured as always, sent a rush of warmth through him. Isabella, Ethan said, trying to keep his tone casual, though his nerves betrayed him. I was hoping we could meet again. There's something I've been wanting to discuss. A long silence followed. Ethan held his breath, unsure of her response. Where and when? She asked finally, her voice cool, yet there was something in the way she spoke that suggested she might be just as intrigued by him as he was by her. Tonight, he replied quickly. How about dinner at my place? I'll have a private chef prepare something special for us. She hesitated for a moment, but then her answer came, soft and almost reluctant. All right, but no fancy promises, Ethan, she added, as if warning him. A small smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. No promises, just dinner. I'll see you tonight. That evening, as Isabella arrived at his penthouse, Ethan was already waiting for her. The space was softly lit, the atmosphere warm and inviting. The table was set for two, and the faint sound of classical music played in the background. Everything was perfect, but neither of them seemed to care about perfection. They were here for something more real. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. Ethan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, revealing parts of himself he'd hidden for years. Isabella, too, opened up in ways that surprised her. They talked about their pasts, their regrets, and the future they imagined for themselves. It was during dessert, as they sipped wine, that Ethan turned to her with a look of quiet determination. "Isabella, I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You said you wanted freedom. I think I can give that to you, in a way that no one else can. I don't want to just be part of your life. I want to build something with you." Isabella's eyes locked onto his, searching for any trace of doubt. But there was none. "Ethan, I don't know what you're asking," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm asking you to trust me," he said, his voice firm now, yet tender. "I want to build a life with you, Isabella, not just a fleeting moment, but something real, something lasting." Her heart raced as she looked at him. She had never expected this. She had never allowed herself to believe that someone like Ethan could want a life with someone like her. But his words stirred something deep inside her, a longing, a hope. "I need time," she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. "This is too much, too soon." Ethan nodded, understanding. "I'll wait for as long as you need, but know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who truly saw her, who wanted more than just a fleeting connection. She didn't know where this would lead, but one thing was certain. This was the beginning of something neither of them could ever forget. The days following their dinner were filled with anticipation and silence, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Ethan, determined yet patient, gave Isabella the space she needed. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, but with her, it was different. He couldn't rush her, couldn't push her. He had to wait. Isabella, on the other hand, found herself tangled in a web of emotions she wasn't ready to confront. Ethan's proposal had shaken her more than she had expected. She had never been the kind of woman to rely on anyone, much less a man with such immense power and wealth. She had always been independent, fiercely so. The idea of depending on someone, especially someone like him, terrified her. Yet every time she saw him, felt the quiet intensity of his gaze, she couldn't ignore the pull between them. It was undeniable, but it was also dangerous. Ethan had everything: money, success, power, and she had nothing but her own secret scars. She wasn't sure if she could give him what he wanted, or if she could even accept the kind of life he was offering. One evening, when the sun dipped low over the skyline and the city's lights began to twinkle, Isabella found herself at a crossroads. She stood on the balcony of her apartment, staring out at the horizon, her thoughts racing. She had just returned from another dinner with Ethan, and the lingering warmth of his touch still burned in her skin. She had asked him for time, and he had given it. But now, in the quiet of her apartment, she realized she had no idea what to do with that time. As she stood there, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. "Ethan, I was thinking about you tonight. When you're ready, I'm here. Always." Her heart skipped a beat. The simplicity of the message, the sincerity behind it, pulled at something deep inside her. She could feel herself softening, her walls crumbling just a little. But the doubts were still there, looming over her like dark clouds on the horizon. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Ethan, I don't need your answer now, Isabella, but I want you to know, no matter what, I care about you. And I want to be there for you in whatever way you need." Her fingers hovered over the screen as she read the words again. She knew she should respond, but the weight of the decision felt too heavy. She wasn't ready to give herself to someone like Ethan, someone who had everything she had never had. And yet, a small part of her wondered if he could be the one to show her that maybe she was worth something more than she had ever believed. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze of the evening wash over her. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would have to decide whether to walk away from the man who had promised her a life she had never dared to imagine, or to let him in and risk everything. The days that followed felt like a slow burn, each moment stretching longer than the last. Isabella had spent hours on end lost in her thoughts, contemplating the messages from Ethan, feeling the weight of his words pressing against her chest. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. The thought of allowing herself to become vulnerable, to trust someone with her heart, seemed impossible. She had spent years building walls around herself, walls that were now crumbling piece by piece. And yet, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him, the way his presence seemed to fill every room, how every glance he gave her made her feel like the center of his world. He had offered her something more than just a fleeting romance. He had offered her a chance at a life she wasn't sure she was ready to embrace. But as the days wore on, Isabella found herself questioning her own fear. Was she running from something real, something she deserved? Or was she simply too afraid of the unknown to take the leap? It was late afternoon when she found herself standing at the window of her apartment once again, looking out at the city below. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the buildings. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the light wash over her, as if trying to absorb its energy. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Ethan, I know this isn't easy for you, but I promise if you give me a chance, I will never hurt you. I want to build something real, Isabella. Take my hand and we'll face whatever comes together." Her heart raced as she read the message. Ethan's words were raw, sincere, and filled with a promise that both terrified and exhilarated her. She had seen the way he looked at her, his eyes filled with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. But there was still a part of her that hesitated. She wasn't sure she could fully trust him, or anyone for that matter. She had been hurt before, and the thought of opening herself up again seemed impossible. What if this was all just a dream, a fantasy that would inevitably shatter? She turned her phone over, letting it rest in her palm as the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her chest. She couldn't avoid it any longer. The truth was, she had already made up her mind. She had been running from it, afraid of what it meant, but now, in the stillness of the evening, she knew. With a deep breath, she typed a response. "Isabella, I'm ready, Ethan. Let's take this chance." Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, then she pressed send. The moment her message was sent, she felt a surge of relief, but also a pang of uncertainty. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking control of her life. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, the greatest risk is not taking a chance at all. The days that followed Isabella's decision felt surreal. She had taken a leap of faith, something she hadn't done in years, and now she was standing on the edge of something unknown. Ethan, as promised, was there for her, his presence constant and unwavering. Every day, he made sure to remind her of his commitment, but his actions spoke louder than his words. He didn't just say he wanted to build something real with her, he showed it. They spent time together, exploring the city, enjoying each other's company without the weight of expectations hanging over them. They laughed at silly jokes, shared their favorite memories, and discussed their hopes for the future. For the first time, Isabella felt a sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She had always been an independent woman, but with Ethan, she was learning to let someone else in. One afternoon, they took a walk through Central Park. The trees were lush with summer greenery, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Ethan had his arm around her as they walked, his presence both comforting and exhilarating. They talked about everything and nothing, about the beauty of the park, the absurdity of their busy lives, and even about the quiet moments they longed for. But as they sat on a bench overlooking the serene lake, a flicker of doubt still lingered in Isabella's heart. She had let herself open up, allowed herself to be vulnerable with him, but there was still something she couldn't fully release. The fear of losing herself in him, of giving up her independence, haunted her like a shadow. "I don't want to lose myself in this," Isabella said quietly, her voice tinged with hesitation. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. He had sensed her unease, but he wasn't going to let it drive a wedge between them. "You won't," he assured her, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "You're not losing yourself, Isabella. You're finding a new part of yourself. This is about building something together, not taking away from what you already are." His words made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't realized how afraid she had been of giving up her autonomy, of becoming something less than what she had worked so hard to become. But Ethan's words felt like a promise that he didn't want to change her, but to support her growth. She took a deep breath and looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. For the first time, she felt like maybe she wasn't just part of a fairy tale. Maybe this was real. "I believe you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I want to see where this takes us." Ethan's smile was warm, and he leaned in to kiss her gently on the forehead, the tender gesture sealing the unspoken understanding between them. They didn't need to know the future. What mattered was that they were taking the first steps together. And that was enough. As the weeks went by, the bond between Isabella and Ethan deepened, each moment spent together, cementing the foundation of their connection. But with that closeness came new challenges. Isabella's fear of losing herself, of becoming too entwined in Ethan's world, lingered in the back of her mind. Every time she felt herself getting too comfortable, a wave of uncertainty would wash over her. She had spent so many years building her own life, her own identity, that she couldn't imagine being anything less than independent. Yet there was a part of her that yearned for something more, a love that could be shared, a life that could be built together. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of Ethan's penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, Isabella turned to him, her heart heavy with the weight of her thoughts. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "About us, about this life we're trying to build." Ethan turned his gaze from the city to her, his expression soft but attentive. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice steady and encouraging. Isabella took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together in her lap. "I'm scared, Ethan. I've never let anyone get this close. I don't know how to balance this love with the life I've worked so hard to create. I don't want to lose myself in this. I want to be me, but I also want to be with you." Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her. He had known about her fears, had sensed the distance she sometimes put between them. But he also knew that she was stronger than she realized. He reached out and gently took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to choose between us and yourself, Isabella," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "I want you to be the woman you are, strong, independent, and free. But I also want to be by your side, supporting you, sharing this journey with you. We don't have to fit into any mold. We make our own." Isabella looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was love, unwavering and unshakable. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Love wasn't about losing yourself. It was about finding new ways to grow together, to support each other while still remaining true to who you are. She smiled softly, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "I'm starting to believe that," she said, her voice full of quiet resolve. "I'm starting to believe that we can have it all." Ethan leaned in and kissed her gently on the lips, a kiss that spoke of promises, of new beginnings, and of the future they would build together. There were no more doubts, no more fears. They had found their way, not by following a script, but by creating their own story. As they pulled away, Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Then let's make this our story." And so, with the city lights sparkling below them, they began the next chapter of their lives, together, strong, and united. The future was theirs to write, and it was full of endless possibilities.